Greetings, my name is John Savers. This is Top Hat and Buttered Popcorn. I'm your host, and today we'll be reviewing a fairly recent film, a very popular film, a film that was acclaimed as a possible Oscar winner in a number of departments, entitled Pulp Fiction. This particular film was a episodic film. It was irregular in its structure. The opening segment was not completed until the end of the movie. An interesting aspect of this movie was that the internal structure was, of course, episodic, but the episodes were not historically continuous, linear. They overlapped in time, space, and you had such interesting events as the death of an individual in one episode, followed by an episode in which that individual was very much alive. The concluding of the last episode, from a historical point of view, would be the one in which the Bruce Willis character gets on his chopper with his girlfriend and heads south. The views portrayed are violent, destructive, and in no way could be considered legitimately positive or beneficial. There are only intermittently scenes or implications of virtue. And we get a certain ambivalence, particularly in that regard, in the Bruce Willis character. The Bruce Willis character is a boxer, and on a few occasions he seems to be struggling within himself to do the right thing. But his efforts are so tarnished by the objective facts related to his life, that is, Bruce Willis happens to be under the umbrella of control of a mobster whose empire extends apparently even into Europe, and which no doubt is based primarily on drugs, but also in gambling and so forth. This particular gangster was played this particular gangster had the name of Marsellus Willis, and he was a large black gentleman with a shaven head and a style of presence that called to mind, for me, the Marlon Brando character in Apocalypse Now. And thus it was with Marsellus Willis. He controlled, at least nominally, this boxer, Bruce Willis, and he directed this Bruce Willis character to take a dive, and this Bruce Willis character had reluctantly agreed. The dive was supposed to occur in the fifth round of this fight, and we see a struggle within him in this regard, and this brings forth a flashback, and the flashback took Willis back to his boyhood days. Christopher Walken, who portrayed a military officer who had shared a prisoner of war accommodation with the father of the Bruce Willis character. And we meet him in a flashback in which the Bruce Willis character is a boy of 7 or 8. And as the Walken character renders the tale, he becomes more crazed and more absurd in his story. And we begin to infer a lunatic element in this whole business of military tradition and familial traditions and heirlooms and so forth. It might be interesting to juxtapose this particular attack, as it were, upon tradition with the affirmation of tradition which was found in the recent Star Trek film, Generation. It seems to me that this portrayal of this particular event, the Gold Watch story to the Bruce Willis lad, I think that this is clearly a strike at both the military tradition and the familial traditions, making them a thing of contempt because of the absurdity with which it is here so closely tied or entangled. And Christopher Walken, who gives a very credible performance, and it could well be that many would liken his performance to that of Sterling Hayden's in Dr. Strangelove. At any rate, I would not go so far because it would be hard to beat Sterling Hayden in that particular flick. The Bruce Willis character apparently was much impressed by this story and about the tradition of his family. And no doubt this was not the first encounter he had with this particular storyline, the family, its history and so forth. But I did recall and firm up in his mind a certain heroic and military tradition. And consider, perhaps because of this reason, and certainly not excluding greed from Willis, he made the decision not to throw this fight, but in fact to go ahead and do his best to win it and to make a killing through the bookies in the process. Now, Marsellus Wallace had given now when Bruce Willis had visited the hoodlum king and been given his orders, he was also given an envelope with a pretty thick wad of cash, apparently, and presumably he bet that money with the bookies also. And this would, of course, lead to a killing for him if, in fact, he won. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, not only did he win, but he killed his opponent in the ring, not intentionally, but any time one boxer gives another one a really savage beating, at any rate, in this particular movie, the Willis character is doubtful in this regard, and he may have intentionally overbeaten this fellow, his opponent, much more than necessary to defeat the fellow, and therefore there might be a legitimate reason to think of him as at least a murderer, next door to a murderer. And as I say, his opponent did die in the ring. These kinds of situations are always a little bit ambivalent to the viewers and a little blurry and hard to make decisions on, but needless to say, he carried some moral burden for that. He is going to make a run for it after he cashes in with the bookies, and he has a girlfriend who is a French-speaking lass. It may be appropriate to state now, one of the segments in this particular film involved the hoodlum king and Bruce Willis in a struggle that unfolded across a confused landscape. For after the fight, Bruce Willis had no choice but to skip and lay low as best he can and have his Confederate, his girlfriend, and at least one Confederate tried to act in his stead. But it just so happened that although he specifically told his girlfriend to remove his heirloom watch from the apartment and to take it with her along with the other effects he wants, she failed to do it. And so he was obliged to go back to his place and to try to find this watch. At least he felt he was obliged. Others might say, well, now, isn't this a tad silly? But as this particular gold watch was imbued with great folklore of a familial type, tradition and so forth, Willis went back for it. And it might also be mentioned that it seemed to be a tradition in his family to do way beyond what was called for to preserve this watch. And Willis carried on that tradition. He went back to his apartment in a rather cagey, crafty mode, and got into his apartment, and at first everything looked quite in order. He felt safe, and he found his watch, he found a gold watch, but he also found what appeared to be some kind of machine gun. And so therefore he recognized a certain danger. About this time, the Vincent character comes out of the bathroom, presumably, and Willis mows him down with his own machine gun. Now this happens in the central part of the circular structure of this film. Willis skips after this, and taking care to wipe the gun, the prints he might have left on the gun, and skipped on out, and as he was driving in his girlfriend's car, he happened to see crossing the street, just as he was approaching an intersection, the hoodlum king carrying what appeared to be some sort of containers of fast food or food or deli food or some kind of such. And there was that recognition, and Willis felt that he had no choice, so he just hit the accelerator and ba-boom. There went flying over the car this rather large boss of the gang, and the boss, although stunned and kind of staggering, managed to get out a huge gun to start taking shots at Willis, who had in the meantime run into a fire plug or into a telephone pole or some such. Now, as he was bloodied a little bit around the nose, he was being tended to or comforted by a little gaggle of street people, women, who had come to help him, and this did not deter the hoodlum king at all from taking pot shots immediately at Willis, and naturally he hits one of the young women who was trying to assist Willis. Willis, of course, is not going to hang around to offer succor to her. He instead takes it on the run, and knowing his life is in great peril. The hoodlum king begins following him and shooting and staggering and falling, and it became a kind of absurd chase, a very comical chase, although very lethal in intention. And it caused Willis to get into a pawn shop, and in the pawn shop he was also met by the hoodlum king, and they got into a struggle in which the Willis character came out on top, and he was popping the hoodlum king a few good raps on the chin, and just about ready to blow his head off with his own gun, when the proprietor, manager of the pawn shop, levels a shotgun at the two and commands that they cease and desist, and tells the Willis character to put the gun aside, and then holds them as basically prisoners. He awaits a character named to us Zed, or known to us as Zed. When Zed arrives, we see that he is a security guard of some sort. He has a kind of a police-type uniform, which seems par for the course for security guards, and when they're not dressed as hotel doormen. And we see these two, Willis and Marsellus, and we see these two, Willis and Wallace, both tied up with what looks to be a kind of a fishing bob or ping pong ball type rubber ball stuffed in their mouth, and they are really harnessed, so to speak. And Zed and the pawn shop manager are discussing what to do, and they play a kind of idiotic eeny, meeny, miny, mo game. And it was unclear to everybody exactly what was going to happen, but we did know this much, that these two were a strange and perverted couple themselves, because prior to making a decision exactly which one was going to be the first doomed, and then unchained some kind of poor fellow who was dressed all in leather as a kind of chattel prisoner, kept in a box of some sort, and very enigmatic, to say the least, although apparently not entirely strange in the California milieu for these events to occur. Now consider, soon it becomes evident that both Zed and the pawnbroker are perverted in their instincts as can be, and the Willis character manages to escape, and as he is escaping, he hears the sounds of the hoodlum king and his tormentors, and there came over Willis this ambivalence, this instinct to do something which might be considered right or moral or heroic or something in this particular way. He was going to, the instinct was to save this fellow from the even more depraved people who had him. And so he begins to look for tools to help him out in this, and then he sees a samurai sword, and he gets a samurai sword, and this is his weapon of choice to confront the pawnbroker and Zed, these villains in the basement below, tormenting his former boss. And down he goes, and he quickly dispatches the pawn shop manager, owner, with a sword slash, and then he begins to face Zed. And Zed, we see, has been having a sexual intercourse with the hoodlum king, who has been kind of strapped over a barrel-like apparatus. And the scene actually called to mind that which was portrayed in the movie Deliverance some years back. But when Zed notices the intrusion, of course, he disengages, and he is thinking to go for his gun. But Willis is all cocked with his samurai sword by this time, and basically saying, "Go for it, you know, make my day." And while they were having this kind of cat and mouse type of game with the pistol and sword, there suddenly was this voice from the rear saying, "Step aside," and we see that the hoodlum king has arisen from his bondage and has a shotgun aimed, and he steps forth and shoots Zed in his loin area. It may be appropriate to state, although the hoodlum king had plans to dispatch Willis, he did come to an agreement with Willis. Willis gets the hell out, basically, and keeps his mouth shut, and that was his part of the deal, and the hoodlum king would let him live, and in the meantime, the hoodlum king was thinking, as he put it, medieval, in regard to Zed, who was by no means dead, but in considerable pain. Willis does indeed skip, and he rides off on Zed's chopper and goes to fetch his girlfriend at the motel. Now it should be noted here that in the point of view of Hollywood, homosexuality is hardly something to stir any kind of indignation, and is considered a perfectly illicit way to do. But, however, sadohomosexual attacks upon a nominally straight individual may raise eyebrows even in Hollywood. And what was particularly galling here may well have been the fact that the victim was black and his tormentors were white, and not only this, but had earlier been depicted as having a Confederate flag and being Southern homeboy types and so forth. So far beyond the matter of a sadohomosexual rape as possibly being immoral, there was a perennial immoral and unacceptable aspects of being a neo-fascist and a Confederate flag-waving neo-fascist and anti-Marxist to boot. So, when you also factor in the racial angle, well, naturally, Hollywood could not portray this as a acceptable form of homosexuality. In conclusion, this is a very destructive film. It is profoundly misanthropic. Its vision is deadened, and the subject matter is deadened. In defense of itself, the film probably would describe itself as merely a neutral observer of a certain slice of life, the fly on the wall rendering of events. But we do not accept this. We believe that the director and the writer always have control and always have an intent, and that they cannot escape responsibility for the moral direction of that which they do. When the banner of Gnosticism arose over Hollywood, all hope and morality and virtue were forced to give way to a new order. It was easy for the adversary to rise over the hills of Hollywood, to loom over the bald hills, and to say, "Evil, be thou my good." I cannot recommend this film, as I feel it is destructive and cannot be an aid in the betterment of anyone.